Henry Jones, David Miller, Lynn Paquin for Betty Yee.
So we do have a quorum. Next order of business, approval of the timed agenda.
Second. Yep.
It's been moved by Henry Jones and seconded by Richard Costigan, sorry. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Next is our executive report. Marlene?
Good morning. Marlene Timberlake, Madam Chair and committee members, sorry. Marlene Timberlake Diadamo, CalPERS team member. The agenda before you today has one action item for your consideration. This item seeks approval of the final proposed regulation establishing criteria to define a significant increase in actuarial liability due to increased compensation paid to non-represented employees as specified in Government Code Section 20791. In addition, we have 3 information items: an update, this is the quarterly update on participating employers, a presentation on the annual actuarial valuation for the terminated agency pool, and as directed by the committee in February, we have brought back proposed revisions to the amortization policy regarding a financial necessity. Tongue-tied this morning. The next Finance and Administration Committee meeting is scheduled for November 14th, 2018, here in Sacramento. The November agenda will include the 2018-19 basic financial statements, the first reading of the 2018-19 mid-year budget revisions, and the second reading of the proposed revisions to the amortization policy regarding financial necessity. Thank you, Madam Chair. This concludes my report, and I would be happy to take any questions at this time.
Seeing no questions, we'll go ahead and move on to the action consent items. I don't see, I'll move the action.
No, Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones.
You moved it? All right.
Second.
Moved by Henry Jones and seconded by Richard Costigan. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Information consent items.
Follow me, please.
Mr. Costigan. Whoops.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to take item 5E off of consent and put that after 8A. So we can hear that. Is that okay, Marlene?
That's fine. Put it where, did you say?
After 8A, right
Okay.
before we close.
Oh, at the end, okay.
Okay, 5E after 8A.
May I make one clarification before you
Sure.
do the consent? So on agenda item 5D, there was a typo that was brought to my attention on the annual contract and procurement activity report. The total amount for the POs should be $364 more than what it currently shows.
Okay.
And one more contract. So it should be from, let me go, if we go to 5, is it D or E?
5D attachment.
5D. It should be on the PO, it should be, instead of total number of purchase orders, it should be 20886 instead of 2885. So one more purchase order. And then for the dollar amount, it should be
Are you talking about on page 2 of 2?
attachment 2.
Attachment 2.
Yeah,
Okay.
5D. So agenda item 5D, attachment 2, page 1 of 1. It should be where it says 2,885 purchase orders, it should be 2,886. And then for the dollar amount, instead of $78,389,885, it should be $78,392,449, a difference of $364.
Got it.
I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
I think it's correct on the actual.
It is correct on the agenda item. Thank
Yeah,
you for that
okay.
clarification.
All right, thank you. So seeing no other items pulled, we will move on to, where are we? Agenda item 6A. And that's the final proposed regulation for employer, yes, we are tongue-tied at this time in the morning, actuarial liability, significant increase.
In all fairness to us, it is a mouthful.
It is.
Good morning, Randy Zubek, CalPERS Actuarial Team. Item 6A is an action item for which we are requesting approval by the committee to proceed with submission of final regulations in order to administer Government Code Section 20791. The CalPERS team had previously recommended to this committee that we develop regulations for this code section given the lack of detail in the section itself. That was approved by the committee. The proposed regulations were open for public comment as required, and we are ready at this time to ask for approval to submit the final regulations. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nina, who will go into more detail with regard to this government code section and the regulation process.
Thank you, Randy. Good morning, CalPERS Board. Nina Ramsey, CalPERS Actuarial Team. We are here to discuss the approval of the proposed regulations for employer actuarial liability significant increase. Government Code 20791 requires the CalPERS Board to define a significant increase in actuarial liability to a contracting agency due to increased compensation paid to a non-represented employee. It also requires that we implement program changes to ensure that the contracting agency that creates the significant increase bears the increased liability. Because it has been a while since we last discussed this section code, please allow me to provide a quick refresher. From a high level, this code applies to members who have worked at multiple CalPERS public agencies and experience a large salary increase, resulting in an excessive liability increase at a previous employer. This code requires that a portion of that increased liability be attributed to the agency that caused the large liability increase. When a significant increase has been identified, the liability for a member will be reallocated, so the employer who gave the significant salary increase bears a larger portion of the member's total liability as compared to our normal practices. This will provide relief to the impacted agency who employed the member at a significantly lower salary. This reallocation will have no impact on the benefit the member receives. This code does not include the state and schools groups, meaning that they cannot be held as impacted or causative in these scenarios. It only applies to public agencies. The significant salary increase must also occur while a member is in a non-represented position. This code section became effective with PEPRA on January 1st, 2013. We proposed that regulations be created at the November 2017 meeting. The board approved the recommendation to pursue the proposed regulations, which would assist in the implementation and administration of Government Code 20791. We submitted these regulations for public comment, which closed on April 2nd, 2018. No comments were received. Because no comments were received, the proposed regulations are unmodified from the previous version that we presented to the board in November. The proposed regulations are shown in Attachment 1. The proposed regulations define a significant increase in actuarial liability due to increased compensation paid to a non-represented employee and clarify how the increased liability will be allocated between the impacted agency and the respective causative agency or agencies. A significant increase in actuarial liability due to increased compensation will be deemed to occur if the following conditions are met. 1, the actuarial liability of the impacted agency increases by $25,000 or more per year of service earned at the impacted agency. 2, the member's highest compensation at retirement was at least $65,000 greater than the highest compensation paid at the impacted agency. And 3, the average growth rate between the highest annual compensation paid at the impacted employer and the highest annual compensation at retirement was at least 10%. These threshold tests and corresponding benefit adjustments between agencies, if any, will occur at the earlier of the date of retirement or death of the member. Once the board approves these regulations, we will submit them to the Office of Administrative Law. Once approved there, we will immediately begin implementation. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Certainly, we do have a couple of questions here. Mr. Costigan?
I just want to thank you for the report, and I just think you answered the question. When this went before the reg discussion, nobody showed up in opposition, no one showed up in support.
I'm sorry?
Nobody showed up in opposition, nobody
Correct.
showed up in support, and no comments were made.
That is
Okay,
correct.
thank you.
All right, Mr. Jones?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned that it does not excuse me, impact the schools or the state. So what happens when an employee leaves the school district and start working for the state, and then that threshold that you mentioned occurs? So how is that handled?
No adjustments would be made in that scenario. The government code refers to contracting agencies, which we believe to mean public agencies only.
So that additional liability would be split equally between the state and the school district, even though the school district did not participate in granting that higher salary?
That's correct. That's how it works currently.
That doesn't seem right.
Well, I don't believe the idea of the code was to throw out our reciprocity rules, meaning that when an employee goes through their career and receives a higher compensation, it would apply to all previous appointments. Because the code does not include the state and schools groups, we're unable to make any
Yeah,
adjustments.
I understand.
Yeah.
Okay, still doesn't seem right.
Yeah, that's the, all right, thank you, Mr. Jones. Ms. Brown? Oops, can you push the button? Oh, you are? You disappeared.
Good? Okay. So tell me a little bit about implementation. So you have 45 days, then you'll start implementing it. So it will be for retirees in 45 days when you implement it? Or will it be only if they move a job and then it starts? I'm curious how that's going to work.
Yes, so the plan is to review all retirements and deaths that resulted in monthly benefits that started on January 1st or later. All of those will be reviewed to see if adjustments are necessary. But we're only going to review these at the time when a monthly benefit begins.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Seeing no further questions?
So it's kind of virtual.
Yeah, because you disappeared. There you go. Seeing no further questions, this is an action item. I'll entertain a motion.
I'll second.
Motion made by Henry Jones, seconded by Richard Costigan. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, all those opposed? Great. Agenda item 7A passes. We are moving on to agenda item 7, that was 6A, I'm sorry. We are moving on to 7A right now. Reporting on participating employers.
Do you want me to introduce?
Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. Arnita Page, CalPERS team member. Today I'll provide an update on our participating employers report, our quarterly report, and I'll focus on new voluntary terminations that we received and any employers experiencing hardship. I'd like to move your attention to our PowerPoint, page 2. Page 2 provides an update on agencies with no active members. Since we last reported in April, we had 2 additional employers move to provide their intent to terminate. So on the far left, where you see 8, there used to be 4, now we have 8. The 2 employers came from Two of the employers came from our employer engagement and review column, and then we had 2 come from our assessment and monitoring column for that total of 8. And the status of those 2 were service agreement issues, and the 2 were stop reporting payroll were the issues. And so I'd like to move to the next slide and provide an update of the total terminations that we have. The 4 on slide 3, we added Janesville Fire Protection District and Torrance City on the bottom, and then the next page shows the additional 2 that we provided that provided their intent to terminate. That's Soledad Community Health Care District and Amona. We also, the 2 that provided their intent to terminate last week we had 2 additional that aren't on this report that will be provided to you in December. It was 3 Arch Bay Community Service District and College Town. So those are the 2 that we'll be adding to our report when we provide that to you in December. In terms of our collection activity, I'd like to move you to slide 5 on the collection report. This provides data for March through June 30th, 2018. We're actively working with these agencies. What I'd like to bring your attention to is the terminated cost payment on the bottom. That represents Harold Fire, who paid their termination costs. So right now we don't have any employers delinquent on their termination cost. In terms of the other areas, the normal cost contributions and unfunded liabilities, we're actively working with these employers. Their operational issues or payment we have, and they're solvable. So we don't currently have any employers at this point at risk of termination.
Great. That's great to hear.
Okay. And lastly, we plan to provide an update to the board with our December data. We'll be back, and that pretty much concludes our presentation this morning.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the report. We asked for you to do this so that we could keep abreast of it, and you have, and we appreciate it. We do have a question
Sure.
from the committee. Mr. Jones?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I want to also thank you for the report, and it's a very, very timely report, and it's valuable information that's contained in it, and it also includes the information that was so critical on notifying the members
Yes.
about these issues. I do have one question. Let me find the slide. On 8 of 12, 192 of the iPad, total participants, and I was just trying to understand that number of 742,000. And as I recall, the public agencies are about 31% of our 1.9 million members. And I just did the calculations in my head when I was looking at that, and that doesn't get me to about 742,000. It's more like 590 or 560,000. So I was trying to, and I do understand you have a footnote there that it includes members that may be in dual agencies.
Yeah,
but-
they would be counted. So if a member, was in one area and then another, they
So
would.
we got that many there?
Yes, they would.
Okay, okay.
Yeah,
that's
so
what
in total.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Brown?
Thank you. Going back to page 3 of 12, where we have Herald Fire Protection District.
Yes.
It says their payment was due about 3 weeks ago. Was that made?
Yes, they paid in full.
Excellent. Thank you.
Exciting. Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you. I see no other questions from the committee, so we can move on to item 8A, which is our annual actuarial valuation terminated agency pool. And that looks like Scott Tarando. Oh.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Scott Tarando, CalPERS Chief Actuary. This is an information item, and this item presents the terminated agency risk pool valuation for June 30th, 2017. As a reminder of what the terminated agency is, it is a, when you think about it, it's a kind of like a pool, a risk pool, where when agencies decide to terminate CalPERS, we put them into the pool, and it provides benefits once the contract is terminated. We also require, since there are no recourse on additional employer contributions, to have the employers fully funded when they enter the pool. And with that, I'll pass along to Julian Robinson, who will present the results for this year's valuation.
Thank you, Scott. Good morning, committee members. Julian Robinson, CalPERS team member. I'm pleased to present the results of the June 30, 2017 terminated agency pool. As you know, it's a well-funded pool, and the funded status as of June 30, 2017 was just over 200%, 201.5%. The fund ratio has changed since last valuation. It's decreased slightly, and the main reason for the decrease is the addition of 5 agencies to the pool in the June 30, 2017 valuation, and also there was a change in assumptions underlying the valuation. The discount rate used in determining the actual liabilities in this past valuation was 2.93%, and this is the rate on the 30-year U.S. Treasury separate trading of registered interest and principal securities, mostly known as STRIPS, as of the valuation date, which was June 30, 2017. We don't expect any new plans. Well, we know no new plans will be included in the next valuation, which is June 30, 2018. With that, if there are any questions that the board has on the valuation, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
So Julian and Scott, thank you very much for the report. Very thorough. So I had one quick question. With the discount rate at 2.93% and inflation at 1.96%, how does that impact that fund?
Well, the rates are set on an annual basis, and as Scott alluded to, that when plans are put into the TAP, there's a separate investment policy which applies to the liabilities of the terminated agencies. So what happens is the agencies, the assets in respect of these agencies are immunized, and the investment office sets up a cash matching portfolio to track the expected benefit payments and the future payouts of investments, which are mostly treasury bonds. So this rate gets reviewed every year and reflects what the current status is of the inflation and the discount rate as of the valuation date each year.
Okay, great, thank you. One more question from the committee, Mr. Jones?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, you mentioned that there were 5 additional agencies that were added. And you mentioned that the funded status went down a little bit because of the additional agencies. And I'm looking there, and East San Gabriel I know about, but are the others involuntarily added, or are they voluntarily added?
No, I believe all of them were voluntarily added to the...
So if they're voluntarily, I thought that there was a requirement that they come in at 100+% funded, so how did that decrease?
That's true. The nature of the fund is that it has approximately, as of the last valuation date, it had 140 million approximately of surplus. At the previous valuation, it had 130 million of surplus. So the actual dollar amount of surplus has increased. However, the funded status will decrease each time the fund gets larger. Now, for example, if you had a fund which had $100 million of liabilities and $200 million of assets, so you have a $100 million surplus. If suddenly you added a large increase in both the assets and the liabilities, the absolute amount of the surplus would remain pretty much the same. However, as a proportion of the entire fund, it would drop.
I see.
So that's what you're seeing here.
Okay, thank you.
All right, seeing no other questions from the committee on this, we will move on to, and I appreciate your report. Thank you very much again. We'll move on to 8B, the proposed revision to the amortization policy regarding financial necessity.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Scott Triano, Chief Actuary. Item 8B is an information item. This is the first reading of the Actuarial Office's recommendation on changes to the portion of the amortization policy that addresses possible extension of the amortization period due to financial necessity. Back in February, when the board and this committee adopted the new amortization policy, there was some concerns and questions about shortening the amortization period and the impact that particular employers might have with the new policy. At that time, we were directed to review the wording and engage with stakeholders on the hardship policy and come back with our recommendations. Today is the first reading of those recommendations. So with that, I'm going to have Randy Zubek step through some of the changes and our recommendations on the policy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Randy Zubek, CalPERS Actuarial Team. As Scott mentioned, we've spent the last several months reviewing the existing policy and assessing how well it aligns with our modified amortization policy on the whole. We've spent a lot of time within our office. We've reached out to our financial office and engaged them in this discussion. We've had a lot of discussion with various stakeholders, received their input and recommendations. And what we have for you today is a first draft of our proposed changes to the existing policy. The changes cover a couple different aspects of the policy. The first is the determination of whether an agency is in fact experiencing a financial necessity that warrants reducing the UAL payment. And the second aspect of the policy is if the chief actuary determines an extension is warranted, what will the amortization schedule look like after the extension? So let's start with the process for performing financial analysis of the agency to determine whether, in fact, a financial necessity exists. The actuarial office worked quite a bit with the pension contracts and pre-funding program division of CalPERS, the PCPP, looking at their existing process of financial analysis for agencies that are looking to enter CalPERS. This group within CalPERS has a fairly standardized process for collecting financial information, performing analysis, and documenting results. And after reviewing that, the actuarial office felt this would be a fantastic tool to use for this process as well. So now within the modified policy, the financial analysis will be conducted by this PCPP group initially, with that analysis then being provided to the chief actuary. At that point, the chief actuary has the final decision as to whether an extension will be granted to the agency, and if so, will then determine what the revised amortization schedule will look like. Now, the existing policy has a standard approach of extending the amortization period out to 30 years and using what we call a level percent of pay amortization method. And that method is consistent with the old amortization policy prior to the changes made in February. So the proposed policy now will have a standard period of 25 years to be used for financial necessity, and also use a level dollar method of amortization, again, to be consistent with the changes made to the broader amortization policy. Now, in cases of extreme financial necessity and when determined to be warranted by the chief actuary, we may consider a period as long as 30 years for this purpose, and also may consider using a level percent of pay amortization method. However, both of those options, 30 years as well as a level percent of pay method, would be expected to be used only in very rare instances. And as well, the proposed policy now includes a minimum requirement such that the payment in any year towards unfunded liability has to be at least as great as interest on that unfunded liability. So for example, if in one of those rare cases, the chief actuary selected a 30-year period with level percent of pay amortization, as most of you know, that schedule in the early years would produce payments that would not be great enough to pay the interest on the UAL, something we call negative amortization. And in order to avoid that, even in these cases of financial necessity, there will be a minimum requirement of a payment equal to at least the interest on the UAL. Another change in the policy that we're recommending is that after a period of about 3 to 5 years after being granted an extension, there will be a reassessment of the financial condition of the agency. And if it's determined that a financial necessity for a lower UAL payment no longer exists, the chief actuary will have the option of re-amortizing the existing unfunded liability over 20 years as a level dollar. And lastly, as exists in the current policy, should the chief actuary grant an extension in these cases, he or she will bring those to the board annually to inform the board that this was done. And with that, I will take any questions.
So, thank you very much. We did ask for this. I appreciate that you guys brought this forward. We were very concerned about our public agencies and the employers being able to afford this. I think I had one quick question on, you talked about after 3 to 5 years you're going to reassess and have an option to change it, put it back to 20 years or keep it the same, I assume is what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, yes, that's correct. It's not an automatic, this will happen.
Yeah.
There'll be an engagement with the employer where we'll have conversations and we'll take a look at where they're at and where their financial situation is. We just didn't want to be in a position of they ask for a hardship, set it and forget it. We wanted to keep track on where the employer is and make sure that's providing the support and need that they need in the first place.
Right, absolutely, especially if they're only paying the interest. They will never pay down their unfunded liability.
So we definitely wanted to keep it on our radar screen and just kind of make it clear that we will be coming back and reviewing it. So that there's no surprises, that when it happens, that they're expecting it.
So, and I don't want us to turn into their babysitters by any means, or, you know, to be telling them what to do, but I would imagine this PCPP group that's going to do the extensions, right, review of the financials, et cetera, is there going to be working with them to ask them how they're going to get out of this so that they can catch up with their unfunded liability? I mean, I think that should be part of it.
Yeah, I think during the initial phases when the financial information is submitted, there is a lot of back and forth between the financial office and the employer to make sure we have the situation assessed correctly. And it's not just a one way, here's the information and we do our analysis. It's back and forth, and you know, while it's stated that you know we get the information and then the decision's made, there is a lot of interaction and back and forth within this process. It's not as I think one-sided as it's illustrated in the policy, but we anticipate a lot of back and forth and engagement with the employers to make sure we have the correct information from them, and where we are going with our decision. So there'll be no surprises in this process.
Okay, great. I do have one more question from the committee. Lynn Paquin for Betty Yee.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to thank you, Scott, and your team for the work on this policy. I know that this was had a lot of discussion around the changes to the policy back in February, and although we were concerned about those agencies that were truly fiscally distressed, I think that you've struck a good balance between trying to help meet them where they are and get them back on the road to addressing their unfunded liabilities. So I do appreciate that. I did have one question, and I was curious to know if there's any agencies out there that are on your radar right now that you think would want to start using this policy when it's enacted.
We haven't heard anything specifically. I mean, we do get calls and some concerns about there could be some financial challenges in meeting the payments, maybe not this year, but they, based on our projected and projections, they see difficulty in meeting some of those payments, and we encourage them to call us. Just because we've presented the policy today doesn't mean they have to wait for this policy to kick in. There's a hardship policy now, and we always have the ability to work with them to kind of make adjustments in their unfunded liability payment stream to kind of work with them right now as well. So there's an ongoing process, but we haven't heard someone come to us right now saying we are in a hardship policy need right now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Before we move on, I'd like to acknowledge that Mr. Fechner and Mr. Miller are here. And we have requests for speaking on this item 8B. And if I'll call you up two at a time, if you'll come over here to my left, Dorothy Johnson and Tracy Ryan. Dane, you might as well come up and at least get up front. You're my last one. Oh, hey, they cleared out for you so you can all sit up here. You will have 3 minutes for your comments, and it's up to you who wants to go first.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Dorothy Johnson with the California State Association of Counties. Want to first start, of course, by expressing our great gratitude to Scott and Randy and the staff, thinking of where we were back in, February when we first started. There's really been just a great foundation of dialogue, meetings, webinars, conference calls, and I feel like this whole exchange has its own hashtag, TTYA, Talk to Your Actuary, because what we found out from this experience is really there are so many other options available to our county employers beyond seeking a hardship exemption or a financial necessity, and I think that was one of the great outcomes of this process. And I will say the proposal on the table today is a massive improvement, and our agencies have looked at it as an improvement over the existing policy for hardship. But of course, there's always room for ideas, suggestions, improvements from there. And the two of note that I want to bring up today quickly is concern about proving the point that there is a need for the financial necessity exemption, striking the right balance between showing the severity of their financial situation without creating so much panic and concern that really these folks might be moving into a terminated agency or a dissolved agency. So some concern about striking the right balance, but I do understand, of course, there will be dialogue and exchange of data, not a sort of dump of here's our financial situation and then closed door conversation with the CalPERS team. And then the other idea that had come up of concern is the reassessment process that the chair did mention. Our counties, of course, are looking at long-term financial planning, and there would be concern that a reassessment within 3 to 5 years could disrupt that long-term financial goal and planning. And then the final addition that had come up in some of our conversation was possibly including an employer appeal process. Of course, the final decision lies with the chief actuary, but it may be appropriate that, again, as part of that ongoing dialogue and exchange of information, that the employer agency would have one more sort of bite at the apple to make sure that all the information was available and the clear picture of their financial necessity for this exemption was displayed. And I'll just close by saying this is not an easy decision for an agency. This isn't something that everyone is going to rush to the door to answer Ms. Paquin's question. So far, 2 to 3 counties that I'm aware of have mentioned that this might be the option they want to go down. Again, but not taking it lightly because they are aware that this would create additional costs and liability for their agency. And they want to ensure, of course, that the full benefits and offerings that they give to their current employees and their retirees can be sustainable today and, of course, long-term into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Ryan?
Good morning. Tracy Ryan with the Rural County Representatives of California. We represent over 30 counties as part of the PERS stakeholders. I want to echo some of my colleagues' points. We do appreciate all the collaborative stakeholder meetings that have occurred, and we do believe that this is a significant step in the right direction. However, we do have a couple things that we want to note. Again, we ask that the committee considers separating the hardship policy from the amortization policy, as the important issue of hardship could easily get lost in the amortization conversation. Second point, in Section 10A1 of Item 8B, we believe that the draft policy as written is unclear on whether an actuary is relying on guidelines or a formula in determining financial necessity. In discussions with CalPERS actuaries, we understood the intent was to work with stakeholders to collectively draft a document that would paint a picture if an agency, a member agency, needed to seek relief. However, the statement that the PCPP will review if the employer provides sufficient evidence that payment of all future required contributions under an extended amortization period is financially sustainable does not define or elaborate on that evidence, causing some concern for our members. The reassessment criteria after 3 to 5 years also causes some concern. A decision by CalPERS to accelerate the amortization period after this period of time could upset long-term financial planning for an agency who is potentially struggling to come out of a hardship period. There does not appear to be any employer appeal provision as previously stated, and we believe that should be added. While we recognize the specific turnaround time cannot be stated, we note that there is no estimated time frame that will be needed for the PCPP to make their assessment. And we would like to see some sort of process put in place so that we can make sure that it actually meets the needs of the employers. Again, thank you for allowing me to make comment, and we appreciate all the work that the actuarial and stakeholder relations team put into this. Thank you.
Certainly. Dane?
Good morning, Dane Hutchings with the League of California Cities. Echoing the comments made by my county colleagues, I have a few additions I'd like to address, but I do want to specifically thank the Actuary and Department of Finance team. We've worked actually nearly a year on this, going back and forth, and I got to tell you, it's one of the more highly technical issues that we have to deal with with specific to CalPERS policy. cities, I think we align our comments with the counties as far as having an appeal process and continuing engagement with the actuarial office. I think something that was specific to cities in the meetings that we've had that may actually be different than what my county or special district folks may want. We understand that fiduciary responsibility rings key with you guys. However, we do think there needs to be a more of a balance in looking at your employers and looking at their specific factors, not simply just looking at your specific factors. So, for example, my members have been pretty loud and clear in saying when you assess financial hardship, are you looking at the potential number of employees that would have to be reduced over a certain period of time? Are you looking at the percentages of payroll or percentage of general fund budget that's needed? As you guys know, the League of Cities released a study back in January that essentially states that by fiscal years 24-25, about 10% of cities are going to be spending about 21% of general fund budget directly on PERS contributions for employer contributions only. Want to make sure that that's actually a factor. While the policy itself is very broad, which we appreciate because it does allow flexibility, we'd like to see some tweaking in the language that specifically cites some of those specific factors, just so, especially for my smaller cities who, quite frankly, may not have as the staff or the expertise in this area, help them sort of paint a roadmap or a guideline to help them try to provide all of the information needed to your actuarial and Department of Finance staff. With that, just again want to say thank you so much for the collaboration and working with us. This really is sort of a new time where we can really work together, employers, employees, and CalPERS, and so we really appreciate your time and your collaboration.
Certainly. So thank you all. I imagine since this is the first reading, we can have our actuarial office work with you guys on these concerns. One of the concerns I will acknowledge that maybe an employer appeal might be something that we look at. And turnaround time, yeah, there was no definition for turnaround time. I think that's important. I'm not sure the concern about the reassessment. I think that's kind of what my question involves, Scott. If you want to come up, I'm sorry. My question earlier, are we going to work with these folks to make sure that they are looking for a way so they're not just paying on the interest, so that when we do contact them in 5 years, we're not trying to disrupt them, but that we are telling them, hey, maybe, right. However you're going to do this, you need to come out of this.
Okay, so yes, we'll take a look. We'll take the comments made by everyone here and by the members of the committee and go back and look at the what we have. We'll take a look at the reassessment and see whether it needs to be in the policy or whether we can take it out, whether it's a necessity to be in the policy. We also try and look at some timeframes and add some specifics to kind of let employers know what we're looking for in terms of financial information. We can kind of try and get a process mapped out as well. So we'll try and bring all that back. Since we don't have a meeting in October, it'll be back in November. So we'll have some time to talk with various stakeholders about this.
Yeah, I would love that you definitely engage with our stakeholders. And I think I had one other question. I don't know. I mean, it sort of outlines a process you guys are going to go through in this in terms of.
We can probably create like a flow chart or a process chart, just
something that they have to provide.
A visual chart, yeah. We'll get that. We'll bring that back in November also.
That's probably a good idea. All right, thank you, Scott.
Sure.
So we're going to move on. That's the end of 8B, and we're going to move back to 5E. Marlene?
Yes.
I'm looking for it right now myself. There we go. Okay.
Okay, so this is 5D. This is the item that was on
5E.
Oh, I'm sorry. 5E. You're right, 5E. So that was the item that was on consent.
Yes, ma'am.
This is the annual report on uncollectible debt. It comes to you every year, and it's basically a report of the debt that the CalPERS had not been able to collect during the year. So I'm going to ask Anthony Sweeney to come up, and we're going to talk about the process. I presume that there's questions around the process.
I imagine
for
that.
this for this item.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Anthony Sweeney, CalPERS team. This item contains write-offs of our overpayment receivables that we have. We do pursue these receivables. We send letters to the bank. We pursue collection activities. And as you see the groupings on the agenda item, right, typically they're no source to collect from. There's no remaining beneficiary or survivor to collect that overpayment from. Another large bucket, or the largest bucket, is our statute of limitation write-offs that are per the government code that we must write off. Any balances that can exceed 3 years or 10 years in the case of death overpayments. And then many of these are death overpayments. The member passes away, they had an outstanding receivable, and they need to be written off. The average write-offs over the last 5 years have been approximately $1.2 million. This is in comparison to about $22 billion we pay out every year, so that's about 0.01% in relation to the amount of benefits we pay. And I'm happy to answer any questions specifically you may have about the write-offs.
Great, thank you. So I do have a question from the committee. Mr. Costigan?
So again, I just want to reiterate that for the bulk of these, I think over 1,400 of them were $5 or less.
Correct.
So, I mean, one is an allocation of staff resources. The other is just a prohibition on statute of limitations, are really the two bulks of it, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. All right, that's what I wanted. I just want to make sure we knew what we were talking about. Thank you.
Okay. I don't have any other questions from the committee on that particular item, so thank you very much for taking that up. So I guess we are at summary of committee direction. Ms. Diamla?
Yes. So I didn't take down specific direction other than the conversation around the hardship policy, or financial necessity as it's called now. And I think that was fairly stated, but I did take down a couple of notes around the turnaround time frames, creating a visual chart, and reassessment concerns. And that will be brought back at the November meeting.
Okay, great. And then we are at public comment, so anybody in the public that would like to speak now, you can. I'm not seeing anybody. So I'm going to adjourn the Finance Administration Committee at 8:47. Thank you. And the next committee?
9 o'clock.
9 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you.
Which is pension and health, right?
No.